Every single day in South Africa, 83 people are murdered. Also, children disappear, are exploited, or are sold into silence. And somewhere behind that silence, there is always a predator. In this episode, we go inside the case of Gerhard Ackerman, a man who built an empire of sexual exploitation, filmed his crimes, and traded them online. He wasn't a stranger in the shadows. He was a mentor, a neighbor, and a so-called therapist. Welcome to Profiler Africa.
I was scared.
They society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me.
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
I'm not supposed to get rid of it, so I went to the garage. I've got an ex. Shh. I closed my eyes. I was crying so hard. And all of a sudden, he was there.
It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
I am a human being and a killed human being.
Dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.
Welcome back to Profiler Africa. I am Paul Llewellyn, and as always, I am joined by forensic psychologist and former head of the forensic psychology section at the South African Police Service, Gerhard Labuschagne. We'll be saying hello to him in a second. Tonight, we're looking at a case that shook even experienced investigators. Gerhard Ackerman, now serving time for rape, trafficking, and the distribution of CSAM, or child sexual abuse material, ran a grooming network that preyed on vulnerable boys for over a decade. That's the case we're going to be diving into tonight. If you are joining us for the live, please do feel free to drop us your questions and comments as we go through the chat. It's lovely to be back. We've had a few weeks off while we just regroup and have a little bit of a breather and make some plans for the next year. And yeah, we've done all of that, so now we're back again. Like I said, as always, I'm joined by Professor Gerhard Labuschagne, joining us all the way from Canada. As always, good evening, Gerard. How are you doing?
Hello, Paul. Hello to all the listeners and viewers. Doing pretty good, thank you. The sun is shining, which at this time of the year in Vancouver is always a blessing when you take advantage of it.
Oh, is it really? Okay, so you're acclimatizing then, Gerard. What are some of the things that you've learned in your time in Canada so far? What are some of the key differences between life in Canada and life in Joburg?
Oh my goodness, where to start? I mean, both are beautiful in their own way, but it is nice to be in a place where things work. Cars see you approaching a pedestrian crossing and they already stop for you.
Sure.
You don't have to worry about walking with your phone to the office in the morning if you're listening to something or talking to somebody on FaceTime. So I mean, those things are very nice, I must admit. And you kind of only really realize how nice once you leave our environment, where I think we become so accustomed to thinking about safety. From how we put electric fences on the top of our walls if we can. So yeah, it's just nice kind of things. Phone, you can phone someone and something gets sorted out. Like, you almost like don't want to believe it. It says, no, we'll fix it, we'll let you know. And then they do. It's like really, really great. So that's nice. I mean, South Africa's still got the great weather and great people, but yeah, there are some nice things here.
And Canadians as polite and lovely as they are reputed to be?
Yeah, they are definitely living up to their image of, like, if you walk past them in the street, in South Africa, you'll typically acknowledge someone or greet someone. Like if I was walking my dog back home and I walk past someone, you'd kind of, hello, good morning. Or if you get into a lift, you'd kind of nod and acknowledge the people. So they don't do that kind of stuff. But when you're interacting with them in the shop or the workplace, or you have some like legit interaction, I mean, yeah, they do tend to be sort of very friendly and outgoing people as a nation, which is quite nice.
Okay, well, great. All right, well, we got a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to be talking about the case of Gerhard Ackerman. Before we do that, let's say hello to some of the folks who are joining us on the chat. Let's say hi to, look at this. We've been gone for so long. I've made our comments too small. Let me make that a little bit bigger.
Oh,
There we go.
yeah,
So we've got
Marius is back
Marius
again.
joining us
Thanks.
from the Southern Cape. Welcome, Marius. We've got Marlene with us. We've got Anne Barnes. Good evening. Mariana. Of course, me mum. And Marlene says, I'm glad we're live tonight. Yes, it is lovely to be back with the live. So let's take advantage, get all your questions in around this case. And we're also going to be talking in general about kind of child exploitation, child trafficking, etc., and some of the psychological issues that relate to these sorts of cases and some of the realities that we confront here in South Africa and around the world. So jumping into the case, one last thing I wanted to mention. If you would like to buy us a coffee, you're welcome to do so. Just scan the QR code right there. And every contribution helps. We're really going to be ramping things up on the channel. It was about this time last year that we really got things going on the video front. And it's been a great year. We're currently up to, let's have a look. Let's see. We are currently sitting at, this should appear now. Okay, it's not showing us. Let me see if I can make this work. There we go. So that's where we sit from a subscriber point of view, 29,840. We're ready, a little push to get to 30,000. So help us get over the edge there. Guys, we're going to be posting some new content in the next few weeks as well. So just look out for that. I know I've been promising for a while, but we have been caught up in some issues there. By the way, if anyone's any pro bono lawyers out there that want to help us do some stuff in Canada, let us know. Anyway, guys, let's get on to the show tonight, Gerard, because I'm getting distracted. We're talking about Gerhard Ackerman. Now, this isn't just another criminal. This is a man whose entire personality turned out to be pretty offensive. I mean, he was extremely manipulative, and for as much as 15 years, managed to get away with some pretty terrible stuff. So, Gerard, let's start off with, maybe that's the place to start. Who was this guy Ackerman?
Rightio. So basically, he was born in 1969. So at the time of the trial, he was about 53 years of age. Kind of had a very kind of nondescript upbringing. Didn't seem like there were behavioral problems. Grew up in a stable family. Both his parents were married. They lived in the Vaal area. No issues at primary school. He even had a paper route, delivering papers at one point. He went to two different high schools. I think that was not due to any academic problems. I think a new high school opened up that was closer, if I recall correctly. Completed high school 87, took a gap year, then he went to do military service for 18 months. So he's about my age. So he probably did military service about 90. He would have probably been doing about 88, 89, because that's when it went down from 2 years to 18 months to 1 year. So I was one of the first group of people to do 1 year military service.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, no behavioral problems there. They kind of sort of moved around the country. Went to Cape Town. He had a car radio shop in Strand in Cape Town for 2 years. Came back to the Vaal area. Then he was a sales rep for 2 years. Then he moved to Pretoria, had two little small businesses like delivering bread and cutting lawns. And then he managed a commune for students in the suburb of Linwood. Now, Linwood is a very nice suburb, just sort of the eastern side of Pretoria. So a lot of people going to University of Pretoria might stay in that area. And then he lived in a house selling secondhand vehicles after he kind of left the commune management business. And that was doing pretty good. And then he kind of moved into the massage parlor. And he actually had a small house that he rented. I think it was in Menlo Park. He actually told me it was from a very well-known rugby player who had no idea what was going on there. I don't want to imply that anybody else did. And that's where he started his sort of first massage parlor. And he employed people kind of between the ages of 16 to 22. So that's the first of his 3 massage parlors. And we kind of only know him for the very final one where he was arrested in relation to his activities there. So he'd been running this kind of massage parlor from 2015, and the crimes we know him for about 2020.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, okay, let's just understand how you fit in here. You say, when I spoke to, you've met Ackerman. Talk to us a little bit about your relationship to this case, or kind of your exposure to this case.
Sure. And in a moment, I'm going to close my blinds so we don't have
No, I
any
can
zebra
see you.
stripes on my face.
I can see you soaking in that northern hemisphere sunlight while you can. Don't let us stop you, Gerard.
Yeah,
It may be a while till
One
you
doesn't
see it
expect sun in winter, so it's unexpected, but
okay.
very welcome. So, so I got involved. His trial was concluded, I think, in April 2023. He was found guilty in the High Court of the 740, however many charges. I was in, of course, after your sentence, you're found guilty, you go over into the sentencing phase where both sides can present whoever they want. Experts, witnesses can come, victims can come and testify about the impact. So I was asked, there was a request for services or a request for quotations that gets sent out to psychologists on the central supply database. Legal aid can only approach psychologists who are on the government database registered as psychologists providing assessment services. But none of the psychologists wanted to take the case. None of them wanted to be involved in the case. There's often a lot of negative backlash for anybody from the defense counsels. They always get it, attacked by people. How could you defend, a guy like this? I see someone saying my sound is very soft.
Yeah, I think it just might be you, Gerard. I think you're just speaking a little soft tonight. So maybe you just want to project a little. Yeah.
All right. Okay, I'll try more.
The level is fine. That's it.
Okay. So essentially, the call out went out for people to come and submit a proposal to a quotation, and nobody did. And partly because, like I said, now people often get negative publicity when you have anything to do with a case of a criminal, specifically of this nature. We saw that with the Dross rapist case many years ago. A psychologist, a colleague of mine actually used to work at my unit, who then was outside the police, did the risk assessment for sentencing, did a very good job. I actually supervised or reviewed the report for her. And she had a very balanced, good review of this person's level of risk. But she was nailed in the media on comments, on the newspaper articles about her testimony. People were then posted things on Google review about her. So a lot of people who do forensic work do it in addition to their private practice. And of course, when you're looking for a psychologist for therapy or whatever purposes, you Google search people and you Google search their names once somebody recommends them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these then negative things pop up. So a lot of people felt, I don't want to get involved in the Ackerman case because people are going to have a go at me in the media, and sometimes it's threats, sometimes it's just not very nice things. For me, I don't have a private practice. I was just doing forensic assessments and corporate work. So, for me, if people do want to post negative comments, it's not going to affect my other business, if you understand what I'm saying. And again, I know that I'm going to do an honest, good job in what I do. I'm not going to help someone. That's not my job. It's not the job of any expert to try and help a person. And that, I would give a very balanced report. And it's actually important that the courts do have evidence in these cases, that they do understand what are the potential risks, what can be fixed, what are we dealing with, etc. Because it's often the first time as it's sentencing when these issues come up. They don't actually come up during the trial because we're not talking about the individual and their personality or their diagnoses during the trial. We're just talking about evidence to convict. So that stuff can only really come out at sentencing. So it's actually important that good, honest, quality assessments, whether it's presented by the prosecution or the defense, gets presented in court to guide the court into what are the risks and what can we do to try and fix this. So I was, quite comfortable. Ultimately, I didn't initially submit to when they kind of said, look, nobody submitted. I said, okay, fine. I did first ask his legal aid lawyer, Herman Albert's very, very competent legal aid representative, to send me the judgment, that I first have a scan through the judgment so I can see what he's been convicted of. And I'll give him just some quick verbal feedback. And I did say to him afterwards, I said, look, Advocate Albert's, I read what he's been convicted of, what the court has found as the facts. And, my report's probably not going to be something that's favorable for your client, just because of the nature of all the charges. And he said, look, I just want a good, honest opinion about my client that we can present to the court. And I like that about legal aid lawyers, is that they're often more open to just give me the honest truth. Whereas, if you're a paid defense lawyer, imagine if, your client says to you, yes, let's get an expert, and your expert comes and says something negative about you, definitely you're going to say to your lawyer, why on earth did you bring this guy, you idiot? You're supposed to be helping me, not sinking me. So I always liked legal aid because they're much more open to, it is what it is, and we need to be honest about it, whereas a private lawyer can shop around until they get an opinion that they want. For various reasons, the person might give that opinion. So that's how I got involved. So I was asked to do the assessment, interviewed him a number of times, I think 4 times, spoke to family, friends, had a lot of the documentation, obviously whatever evidence or statements of children, the judgment, and that was the source of my report. Now we'll get to later whether or not my report was used in court in a while.
Okay. Just to give a bit of context there, you referenced the Dross rape case. And just for those viewers that may not be aware of what that case was, that was an incident where a little girl, it was a little girl, was it, was essentially sexually abused at a Dross, kind of went into the public toilet. The Dross is a kind of a bar chain, if you like a pub, if you like. And the little girl went into the bathroom, was followed into the bathroom by a man who then sexually assaulted her in the bathroom. And it was a very big case in the media here in South Africa. So that just gives just for a little bit of context there. Now, you spoke to him. I mean, this is kind of a pretty typical kind of guy, very much a predator hiding in plain sight type scenario. From what I gather, that he was the guy next door, a pretty typical middle-aged Joburg guy.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's the thing about sexual interests is that we all have them to greater or lesser degrees, and sometimes they're more straightforward, vanilla, normal, and sometimes they're a little bit more on the fringe, and sometimes, unfortunately, one's interests can potentially bring you into conflict with the law. For example, things like paedophilia, that's potentially going to bring you into conflict with the law if you act upon it. But, people can be normal, wonderful beings in every other aspect of their lives, but have maybe some unusual interests in their personal sex life. So, it's not surprising that he was kind of a normal, just a guy trying to get along with businesses carrying on, but he has these interests which he kind of converts into a business stream for him.
Yeah. How does somebody like Ackerman manage to maintain this kind of dual existence for so long without detection?
If you go look at in the sort of websites and newspapers, massage services are all over in South Africa. A lot of them are doing stuff that's technically illegal, or a cover for sex services of whatever natures, whether it's a happy ending or something more in full house type of service. And it's not being policed really at all. I don't think the police really are interested in policing prostitution or sex work. So unless you're overtly making it very clear that you, for example, have underage children or other things, you can probably get away with this for quite a long time. So I'm not that surprised that he managed to get away with this. He's also targeting the people that he was recruiting, of course, were these underage children. They were sort of 15, 16, 17 years old, definitely for the time when he was arrested. Earlier years in Pretoria, I think they were a little bit older, but still kind of like below 20s. So, he's targeted victims who are to get involved in this, who had their own vulnerabilities, who were rejected by their families, living in impoverished circumstances, desperate for money, etc. And you're targeting them for those reasons to lure them in, and you're targeting vulnerable people, getting them into an illegal industry. So it's very difficult for them to sort of get out of it. So there's various mechanisms that really made it easy for him to get away with this. But like I said, the one he was arrested for was his third sex work practice that he had over many years.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just some of the tactics here. So he was running massage parlors. The age range of the boys roughly 16 to 22, and obviously exploiting as is so often with predators, they're very vulnerable. Those kind of in financially difficult scenarios or estranged from families, and then using a whole array of tactics to recruit people. It seems social media, using drugs to draw in some, providing drugs, methamphetamines and the like to young people to kind of feed their addictions. And yeah, from what I gather, had a pretty a good client network. I gather that these types of crimes, it's not too difficult to find customers.
Yeah, so the first business in Pretoria, Menlo Park, is a very nice area. I mean, it's a really nice area. It's close to Linwood in Pretoria, not far from the university, and he was surviving off of that for a number of years. If I recall correctly, with that one, he then was in an accident, and that kind of the whole thing fell apart while he was in hospital. The second one, he decided, well, a lot of my customers are coming from Johannesburg, so maybe I should move my business to Johannesburg. And then he moved it to somewhere in Sandton, and was running that quite successfully until I think it was he got arrested for an incident at an aquatics school, and while he was in jail for the weekend, his employees basically stole him blind, and then he was left with nothing, and then he decided to get out of the business. And then he kind of relocated to, I think, Sandringham, which is sort of Norwood side in Johannesburg. And it kind of sounds like at the behest of Paul Kennedy, he said, come on, can you not just help supply me with people and pictures, and that kind of getting slowly back into the business.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about the kind of pornography element. What was he doing there? How was it? Was he generating his own pornography essentially?
Yeah, so there was downloaded technically people now say child abuse, child sexual abuse materials. Images.
Yes, I am.
Commonly referred to as child pornography. And I think that the Act speaks about child pornography still. So some of it was material downloaded from the internet. Those were often, I think, kids between the ages of 6 and 12, according to the former publications report and evidence. But then also he was very often in his initial phases of interacting with these kids that he would meet on Facebook or wherever. He would say, hey, send me a picture of you naked. Send me a picture of you doing this or that. And then he would send them money. And that would very often Paul Kennedy was asking him to get these images, and then would tell him, hey, now get me this with someone doing this. So of course, there's multiple crimes going on there. You've got production. You've got obviously corrupting a child to do this. You've got production of child pornography. The minute the child sends it to you, it's distribution, or the minute you pass it on to Paul Kennedy, it's distribution. So it's production, possession, distribution. So that was a lot of it was for his own and customers' enjoyment. But it was also a mechanism for sort of luring these kids in slowly with money, and then sort of saying, well, hey, you can come work for me, I'll give you a place to stay, and you'll make a lot more money providing these services. And you would typically say to them, look, you're going to have to probably give them, a happy ending, but you're not allowed to do anything else, which the court later said that's been proven to be a lie, that definitely he was advertising the kids to, for example, Paul Kennedy, with a lot more than just a happy ending as part of the package deal.
Let's pause here a second and just kind of do a refresher on kind of what you need to look out for as an individual, and how careful you need to be when it comes to CSAM and these things. I remember a while ago, maybe it was a long time ago, 10 to 15 years ago, there was this period where there were under 18s in the Western Cape filming themselves having sex and then posting those videos onto social media, if you like. And I remember a couple of people I knew and I had copies of these things on their phone. Now, what are the risks here? I mean, everyone's on a WhatsApp group these days, and sometimes something kind of, somebody inappropriate on one of your groups, say an old, school group or whatever, post something inappropriate. What are the kind of things that you need to look out for as somebody who is, not actively seeking out of this stuff, but because of the nature of social media, this kind of stuff can sometimes stumble into your inbox. Even in that example, it did.
Yeah. So the definition of child pornography, it's quite lengthy. I think it's in the Sexual Offences Act, if I'm not mistaken, or the Form Publications Act. It's quite lengthy, but to keep it in its briefest form, it's sexual images. Doesn't have to be pictures. It can be AI-generated stuff, cartoons, hand-drawn stuff, verbal written stories about child sexual activity. all fall under the definition of child pornography. Even images where the person is over 18, but they are they're dressed up or made to look as if they're under 18.
Yeah, okay.
That's also child pornography. So we have probably the most liberal definition of child pornography in a broad sense than most countries in the world. So even if it's completely AI, it's still child pornography. And of course, it has to do with people under the age of 18. So yes, so when you have a kid sending him a picture to another kid, they're both under 18, or the kid who's sending it or taking the picture, or it's a picture of an under 18 person, that's production of child pornography on your phone. If you send it to your friend, your little girlfriend, that's distribution. And then she also has possession of child pornography. So we have to be very careful. So that's why on these groups, WhatsApp groups, not just when it comes to things like child pornography, but in things like, for example, when people start to bash someone, on a group, Paul is such a useless blah, 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 that he does this, he does that. There's case law in South Africa that says if you don't say, I don't agree with this and I'm leaving this group, if there's a criminal court case against you, civilly or criminally, just being on that group and not exiting and saying that you disagree with what this person has just posted, you become in the same category as the person who posted it. The same thing if you forward it onto someone else, or on a Facebook, you retweet or you tag it on Facebook. If you're bringing it onto your Facebook page, you will be seen as just as much in the wrong as the person who posted it originally. So you have to be incredibly careful with these things. Now, if kids send these things to each other and it comes out, would a prosecutor prosecute them? They have to use their discretion. They might see it more as kids with being stupid who just need to be given some guidance, and they probably wouldn't prosecute them. But definitely that picture, if it ends up on your phone, damn good chance you're going to be charged with possession. So it's a very tricky position that you really need to be careful of what you say on these WhatsApp groups or on Facebook or on Twitter and retweeting things. And also, like I said, with this type of material, it's automatically a crime. And you should, the safest thing to do is go straight to the cops and say, I was sent this, do what you guys need to do. That's the safest way to cover yourself.
Okay, so some sound advice there, folks. Let's go to some questions, and I'd like to say hi once again to everyone who's joining us tonight for the live. We are live this week, back again. So if you'd like to comment or pose any questions to Gerard, then please do so. We're going to start off with a simple one. Can you just talk a little bit about who is Paul Kennedy?
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Lauren. I saw that question. So Paul Kennedy was someone who was charged with Gerhard Ackerman. Now, Paul Kennedy was a very well-known advocate in Johannesburg, a very senior advocate, very well-respected in the law world in South Africa, but specifically in Johannesburg. And he was part of this. He was one of Gerhard Ackerman's customers, but also, after Gerhard's second business in Sandton collapsed after he was arrested and it kind of fell apart, Paul Kennedy was encouraging Gerhard to, at least for him, to still provide Paul Kennedy with, kids and images, etc. So in a way, he was a customer, but also quite like a benefactor in a way, keeping Ackerman going, doing what he's doing, providing these types of services. So he was also charged. He then, while he was awaiting trial, committed suicide. So the judge actually caught the end of the judgment, that it would be a remiss not to comment on the despicable behavior of Paul Kennedy, although he's dead. That his role or involvement has to be acknowledged. So yeah, so that's where Paul Kennedy came into the whole sort of sphere. So yeah, sorry, we should have clarified that right in the beginning, Lauren.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.
Gerard, are you with us still?
Yes, I can.
Okay, there we go. So there you go, guys. This is the wonder of live. There we go. So now Gerard's looking. Well, it was looking kind of moody and dramatic with the shadows behind you. It looked like your prison bars were casting dramatic shadows behind you. Okay, guys, Gerard being in Canada, we may experience the odd technical glitch here and there as the internet under the ocean does us a disservice, but we're back. Apologies for that. I wanted to dive into a little bit about just his background and his upbringing. Gabe Plays 02 has asked, sorry, let me just take this out of the way so that everyone can see properly. What can cause someone like Ackerman to become a predator? Could it have been something that happened in his childhood? What do we know about his kind of formative years?
So basically from what he told me and what I could gather from speaking to his brother is that there was nothing of concern that came out. He didn't have any adverse childhood experiences, very normal upbringing. So, and again, this comes to the fact that we don't quite know what makes one person develop into a person who abuses children. We don't choose our sexual interests. So, who we are and what we like, what we're attracted to is kind of determined by factors that we don't understand. Being abused isn't going to turn you necessarily into someone who will abuse people later. That kind of argument, line of thinking has been done away with a number of years ago. There's lots of people who get abused who never go and hurt anybody. So we don't quite know why. Sexual interest and sexual attraction is just something we don't quite know why people develop the way they do.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about his psychological profile then. We can come back to the case and kind of talk about what the outcomes were and what some of the challenges were in court, et cetera. But let's talk a little bit about your assessment of him. As far as I understand, we're looking at paedophilic disorder, the non-exclusive type, and that's something considered lifelong and incurable. Talk to us about the profile.
Ultimately, when I drafted my report and gave it to his attorney then took it to discuss with him at court, in prison, and Ackerman refused to accept my findings and instructed his attorney not to call me as an expert witness. So I got to be careful about what I say and what I don't say.
Okay.
But we do know that it's a matter of record that the victims, a number of them were prepubescent, because also remember there wasn't just the massage parlor charges against him. That's where the majority of the charges stemmed from. There was also two incidences, one in 2007 and one in 2009 at, I think it's the Gamas Kop, which is like it's along the coast, I think, of the Western Cape. It's like a caravan park where they were staying, where he had exposed himself to young kids in 2007, 2009. So he was also prosecuted for that. And those kids were, I think, 7, 8, 9 years old. The child pornography, as I said, was many instances was under 12 years old, 6 to 12 years old. And then he did have one victim, I think, in the hands-on offenses. Yes, that he was later convicted for, who was 12. So prepubescent children would typically be bringing someone into the category of pedophilia. And if I recall correctly, that's what Kirsten Clark, who was a police psychologist from my old unit who did testify, said that, because the child abuse images, it's very likely that he would be able to be classified as that. He had 2 definite rape convictions out of this trial that would make him a serial rapist. That was on 2 of the kids that he had trafficked out to him. But he also had this other case that actually he was arrested for long before this one, where he went to an aquatic center in Sandton. And while he was in the change room, he was being inappropriate. I think he was trying to undressed, filming himself, and I think he touched a child who was, I think, 12. Now, because that trial started before this arrest for what we know Gerhard Ackerman for, they couldn't join the 2 trials together. So that one had to run and kind of went on a pause while the big trial was taking place, and then finished after his conviction. So he was also convicted of hands-on offense with that 12-year-old boy touching him sexually at the aquatic center. So, those things, like I said, would make him having numerous victims. They were prepubescent, which would raise the issue of pedophilia. And that's a lifelong thing. That's a lifelong sexual interest. Mm-hmm. You can't change that any more than you can change a heterosexual person into a homosexual person or vice versa. Your sexual interests are your sexual interests. So he will have that as a lifelong, and it's actually then a risk factor, because if you have this interest in children of a certain age, that's not going to go away. Putting you in prison is not going to make it go away. There's no therapy to cure that. So that'll be a continual risk factor in Gerry's case.
Some of the cognitive distortions that people can have in relation to these kinds of cases, and some which it seems that Ackerman may have been, may be included in that list, believes minors can consent to sexual acts. The age of consent should be 13. Now, I just want to ask you a bit of I don't know if this is a strange question or a controversial question, but, historically, when you reach your sexual prime, when you go through puberty, then, if we go back thousands of years, then as a species, it's very likely that we've been procreating once somebody passes the kind of their sexual maturation, if you like. And that is at those younger ages. Do you have any comment on how as civilization we've come to the point where, that is no longer the case? And is there maybe a part of our programming, or part of some people's programming, that just kind of genetically predisposed to something that, over thousands of years has not necessarily been something that there's been a legal issue with? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, look, I'm not an anthropologist, so I have to be, all I can say is that, most cultures and laws talk about the point of puberty, that before puberty is sexual interactions inappropriate. Look, I think, it's different to 200 years ago when people were dying, by the time they were 40, you're close to dying. So a lot of things happened in the medieval ages when people were 12, 13, people were getting married, because your lifespan, it wasn't very long. And I think a lot of that's changed. And of course, the laws in some countries have kept up with that, not. So in South Africa, I think the age of consent for sexual activity, if I'm not mistaken, is 16. Interesting though, for child pornography, if the images are of someone under 18, so for example, 17 years old, that would be regarded as child pornography. So those don't exactly line up. Ackerman's definitely had those cognitive distortions that you spoke about. So he would have the view of, well, if this kid is 16, why can't he engage in sex work? There's nothing wrong with it. If you are able to consent, surely then you can consent to sex work. Well, sex work's illegal, so no, you can't. And also, he couldn't understand that it's bad to introduce kids to sex work. I mean, it's psychologically bad, it's illegal, it's physically harmful. You expose them to the risk of diseases, of course, and of being physically assaulted by customers, and psychologically it's incredibly damaging to those kids. And he could not see that. He thought, I'm helping these kids because they can earn some money.
Yeah. And he did say that he viewed himself emotionally as kind of 15, 16 years old as well. It seems like he'd come up with a whole gambit of kind of rationales for this, helping young people in need, and the fact that he views himself as emotionally on kind of a similar level to them. Would he know that he's wrong and these are just justifications he's coming up with in his mind, or does he really believe these things and then wants to stand by them in a court of law?
So look, I think he really believes these things, and also they wouldn't help him in the court of law. I mean, the fact that you think the law is different or should be different, or this is how people should be allowed to behave, is bloody irrelevant in terms of the law. It's like saying, I don't think the speed limit should be 85 when this area should be 60. Well, you might even be right, but unfortunately the law says it's not 60, it's 85.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I'm never fails to amaze me the cognitive distortions that these guys will tell you about. They'll say things like, but this 12-year-old child was making sexual advances to me. I was just responding. It's like, well, firstly, that's usually not the case. You're misinterpreting those behaviors. You're misinterpreting a little child sitting on your lap giving you a hug as if it was a 25-year-old woman in a bikini sitting on your lap giving you a hug, maybe. But those are not things that typically work in their favor. The normal person would say, even if a child did come up to you and behave sexually inappropriately, the normal person would say, this is wrong. I need to tell this kid's parents that this kid is doing stuff that they shouldn't, or I'm concerned this kid might have been abused because they're behaving in an inappropriate way. Do I need to get social services involved? These guys won't do that. They will actually, acquiesce and get involved with that child, where most of us would say, this is wrong, and I need to get this kid some help.
A nice comment here from Lauren. At 16, you may consent to sex with another person under the age of 18. If a person over the age of 18 has sex with a 16 or 17-year-old, it is statutory rape or rape of a minor. Then International Nikki, a question for Gerard. Is pedophilia across the gender board? When and how does it focus on particular gender by offenders?
Yeah, so we definitely find more prevalence of it amongst males. But I've definitely had females who meet the criteria for pedophilia. I do also think that society would see it a little bit different. If you have a 22-year-old male teacher who's having something with a 17-year-old or younger student versus a 22-year-old female teacher who's having something with this, a younger student, people don't see it as the same level of badness, although they are equally bad. So I do think that often it probably doesn't get brought out often when it is a female offender. But I think it's probably safe to say that we do have more male people who are then classified as pedophiles.
Okay. I'm just going to go back a few questions. This is a rerun. Just a comment. Pure revenge. This is a case we did cover about 2 years ago when we were just an audio podcast, and we do like to revisit some of the cases that we previously covered in video. And it's also nice to talk about the context of the crime as it relates to today as well. Let's go back. So
during viewer interaction and questions. Yeah,
exactly. During the Ackerman trial, the court
like
repeatedly
yours
reprimanded him for disruptive outbursts, head shaking, interjections. From a forensic psychology perspective, how do you interpret this behavior?
Yeah, look, I think that is just part of his personality makeup. I think it's part of the fact that he didn't think he's done anything wrong. And he was adamant he's going to demand a retrial. And he just couldn't get it that, he just kept on going back to this argument that these kids are over 16. They're allowed to do whatever they want. And that nothing wrong with the sex trade. And what else is the other point that he kind of belabored often? Of course, he said that he denied that the sex, he said he had consensual sex with the two kids that he was convicted of rape for, and that they all lied. He said the child pornography wasn't his. The kids had downloaded it onto his computer or his phone because they had access to his computer or his phone. So denial for some of the things that he could not give any excuse for, and in other cases he just had his own version of what he thinks the law should be. So I think that behavior in court was just him really manifesting his view that he's right, everybody else is wrong, this shouldn't be illegal. And he was quite convinced, even when I saw him in prison, that he's going to get an appeal or a retrial and he's going to be out of it. He was already planning his next, his next business, But
and from what I gather, the potential of reoffense in this kind of scenario is high.
Well, look at it. Absolutely. I mean, this was just the massage part of business. He'd had 3, and also remember, he was arrested for that incident at the aquatic center with the little 12-year-old boy long before he was arrested for these cases that we know him for. So he was already out on bail when he was doing all of these things that we've been speaking about, luring the kids on Facebook, bringing them back, having the massage parlor, Paul Kennedy get involved. He was on bail for the touching incident at the aquatic center. So clearly being out on bail for another sex crime against a child where you think you're going to be on the radar didn't deter him from starting up his whole business again. So that doesn't bode well in terms of a risk assessment for someone's future, risk for doing something bad.
Let's talk about the outcomes of this case. You mentioned earlier on when we were just discussing your contribution and your involvement in the case, working with the defense to do some assessments there. Talk to us a little bit about what happened in the trial. Did the evidence that you brought into the case, was it used as evidence in the case, etc.? And what were the outcomes and results of the trial?
Yeah, so essentially, I mean, as I said, when Ackerman saw my report, when his lawyer presented it, the final report to him, he's like, no, I don't accept this. There's no way you can use this. I reject all of these findings. And unfortunately, any legal representative works on the instruction of the client. And in this case, the client is Gerhard Ackerman. So he could say to his attorney, no, you can't call Labuschagne. There's no legal mechanism by which the court could have forced me then to come and testify, because the court knew that we were standing down for the defense to contact an expert. And I think they even mentioned my name, that we've got someone, it's so on, is Labuschagne. But there's been case law that, you can't force the defense to call an expert that they've decided not to call, even as a court witness. So that was kind of the end of that deal, which is kind of how Kirsten Clark, who was, as I said, a psychologist in the investigative psychology section at the time, did end up coming to testify and really touched on a lot of things I was worried about. Obviously, again, I can't give my final diagnosis here because I don't think it would be quite right, as I was, not called as the witness in this case. But I think the things that Kirsten Clark said, I have no reason to argue against what she said. We just have, a lot of classic behaviors that we see amongst those that do molest children. Okay.
And what was his sentence?
So he definitely got 12 life sentences. Definitely for the 2 rape incidences, because the kids were minors, that's automatic life sentences. I'm thinking that the others were in probably relation to the trafficking. I don't have the exact details, but it's 12 life sentences and then probably a bunch of other little ones, because you wouldn't get life sentences for the pornography stuff. You might get lots of other little years that are added up. But in essence, any additional years after you've been given a life sentence mean nothing, because they're all going to expire long before you can get to the parole point on a life sentence, which is typically, you only are the option for parole at 25 years. Doesn't mean you'll get parole, but that's the first time you're going to have a parole hearing would be at 25 years, not before that. So if you've got 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years for all these other little crimes, we're going to also start on the same day that your life sentence starts. So they're all running sort of parallel, which is something I don't agree with our sentencing in terms of how we sentence people, but that's what the law says. They must all run concurrently, typically. So those little other numbers of years for the more minor cases or minor convictions would all run their course, and you're still going to be sitting there waiting for his parole hearing based on his life sentence that he would have received.
Okay. I think somebody that side with you, Gerard, needs to get their sinuses sorted, because we're hearing lots of in the background. So that's what that is, guys. I think somebody's suffering from the Canadian cold at Gerard's office there. I want to talk a little bit about what are the options for sentencing in this kind of instance. Now, is this considered to be, who is that? Is that your neighbor or something? Because he's not well. Okay, so this is a condition. Is it a psychological? Is there a potential sentence where somebody who has committed these acts ends up in psychiatric care as opposed to just plain old correctional services?
No. So, yes, this is a diagnosis. If he, for example, had been diagnosed with paedophilia, it is a diagnosis. It is a mental illness, but it is not one that impacts your ability to determine right from wrong and act in accordance with that determination. So a pedophile will know that their behavior is wrong, typically because you can show that by how they go about doing it. They're not molesting kids in front of a bunch of people. They're luring people by sort of, underhanded means, grooming them to make sure they don't go and report whatever happened to the police or their parents, bribing them with gifts, etc., and attention. So they know very well that it's regarded as illegal by the legal system. So this isn't something that's going to get them rather into a place like Sterkfontein or Westkoppies psychiatric hospital. So it's different to, say, someone who has schizophrenia and is hearing voices, and the voices tell them, go and stab Johnny because Johnny is an action alien from outer space who's going to kill you if you don't do something. That's a mental illness. It's directly impacting your ability to determine right from wrong, and it's directly related to your case. Chances are, yes, you will end up in a place like Sterkfontein or Westkoppies if that's confirmed by the assessment by Sterkfontein or Westkoppies. But pedophilia, probably all of your paraphilic behaviors, your personality disorders, they don't rob you of that ability to determine right from wrong. So in some cases, like with pedophilia, it's going to actually be an aggravating factor when it comes to your sentence. Now, in this case, you got a life sentence. You can't get worse than that. But if it had been sort of lesser crimes, and I don't mean that to minimize the crimes, I'm just saying that in comparison to child rape, where you might not have got where there's no minimum sentence and it's quite flexible, that would probably be seen by the court as a reason to increase your sentence because it's the only way to keep society safe. Because also, as I said earlier, we can't fix that. You can't change someone's sexual interests in the same way you can't change someone's personality.
Again, just continuing this line of questioning, have you come across instances where somebody has these issues, where they know that they are sexually attracted to people who are underage, and yet they choose not to act on those desires? They do not gather any of the materials related to the feelings that they're having, and like I say, they meaningfully and willfully don't act on their desires. And is there a treatment protocol for people like that? Have you come across people like that?
Yeah, so you definitely do. Look, the reality is we're going to hear about most of these people when they're brushed up against the law. They've done something, they've had child pornography, they've touched a child, etc. But definitely there are a lot of people who have these interests who don't want to act upon them because they know it's wrong, who might go and seek the assistance of a psychologist and say, look, I've not touched anybody, I've not downloaded child pornography, I have these urges, I know they're wrong, can you help me manage them? Or, as I said, you can't really fix them, so we're not talking about cure, but can I at least make sure that I don't do something that's going to get me in trouble and, of course, hurt another person if I were to abuse them? So yes, to find out about this people is more difficult because it'll be in the confines of a therapeutic practice. And as long as there's no concern that the person is actually molesting or is about to go out and molest, then of course the psychologist would be legally obliged to report to the necessary authorities that they fear something is going to happen or something has happened. So if your client came back to you on Monday and said, look, oh my goodness, over the weekend I ended up molesting my neighbor's child, that psychologist would be probably ethically bound to go in and report that to the police. Okay.
All right. Look, these are... it's one thing to look at the Ackerman case and to look at for how long he got away with this in extremely affluent areas, undoubtedly dealing with people who have all of the kind of... economic success and probably, smart enough to know that they're doing terrible things. But now we also live in a society where, as we discuss on the show, law enforcement is becoming more and more of a problem. The police are, from what it seems, becoming less and less capable. We're losing more and more expertise, and we don't seem to be replacing that expertise. The crime statistics seem to be constantly going up. So what are your thoughts around the kind of the gravity of this issue today in South Africa, considering that I think latest UN reports said that as many as 1 in 3 South African children are at risk of online violence or exploitation, for example. We know that, yes, young men are overwhelmingly the majority of... Oh, we've lost Gerard there. I will continue to ask that question in a moment, folks, when he joins us again. In the meantime, please, if you haven't already,
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.
I was just talking a little bit about the scale of the problem in South Africa, and what are your kind of thoughts on where we're probably at right now with regards to child abuse, essentially?
Look, I mean, the police does have the Family Violence, Child Protection, Sexual Offences units, which detectives are trained to investigate these types of cases. But that's reactive. You have to wait for something to be reported by whoever to the police. I think we need to have much more proactivity, and I don't know how much of that's being done. We need to have, and this is probably going to be a heavily cyber orientated, people out there that are contacting these massage parlors saying, hey, seeing if the person does have, if you hint that you would want somebody younger, and then raiding those places, or following up people who are predators online. So a lot of other agencies overseas do that. They will try and find online predators and get their information and get them arrested. I don't think we've got that on the scale that would probably be necessary. I think our police is overloaded with cases and under-resourced. And I'm a bit anxious about our cyber capabilities. I know a lot of the cyber stuff has been outsourced to other people, private companies, to assist the police. So, the day-to-day stuff where we see, an uncle molesting a child, that's always going to be, we have to get people to know what's good and bad touches. We need to have to get people to know who to come forward to report it to. But as I said, on the other side of it, the things like Paul Kennedy was up to, that's probably going to be more cyber-orientated to try and find people who are doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And, there are some very dark corners of the web, which I no doubt make it extremely difficult. And, and criminals are clever. They're always coming up with new ways to do things and taking advantage of the kind of growing list of tools we have at our disposal in the online space. So, this just, I guess, has to just be considered in the context of our broader efforts to turn around the entire law and order kind of circumstances in South Africa. And when we as a society choose to do that and to act en masse to kind of make that into a reality, then these are the kinds of crimes that we can start to prioritize, that the police really focus on and take care of. Because, if a society is not taking care of its women and children, then there's you have to start looking at what are the fundamental flaws within that society, within that culture, especially when the levels are get as high as they do in South Africa, and when the problems seem to be as rampant as they are in South Africa.
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay, so Gerard, I think it's time. We've done a solid hour, and now that we're back with the live, I think that's a good amount of time for us to cover with the folks at home. Have we ever covered the Gert? Let's have a look at. Have we ever covered the Gert van Rooyen case? We have not, and it is one of my favorite cases, and it's one of those ones I dream about making a documentary series on, kind of revisiting that case, because there have been so many. It's been revisited over the decades, and it seems that this has been probably the longest break since I've seen anything in the media of anyone really diving into this case. I know that they did dig up some of the previous sites in the last kind of 10, 15 years, but haven't heard much about it recently. So definitely we'll put it on the list of cases to do. I'll have a little look at the questions now just before we wrap. On this case, Gerard, what were your, what are the takeouts for this case, and what are your kind of final thoughts on the Gerhard Ackerman story?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think it's just amazing that this guy got away with this for so long. As I said, he had 3 massage parlors where he was pretty much doing a very similar stuff for many years. Was brazen in continuing this even once he's arrested for an incident out at the aquatic center, still continuing to do this type of stuff out on bail. So I mean, for me, his fascination is his personality. and also the fact that he could just get away with this for so long. I mean, that's for me why do we have a case that has 700 and something charges? Could have done something better sooner. That would be kind of, is there area for improvement? We can boast about the fact that he was convicted on how many hundreds of cases of charges. But we also have to look at ourselves. It's like once I had SAPS was celebrating the fact that they got a guy convicted of 80 rapes. I'm like, that's an embarrassment that the guy got to 80. Yeah. Kudos on the final guys who caught him and put the case to court, but that's actually kind of a sign of a element of failure in the police that this individual got to that level or amount of cases before he was actually caught.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we mustn't underplay our own responsibility as citizens just to be ever vigilant. And where these things prop up, if something weird pops into a WhatsApp group, unfortunately, we're at that point where you need to act on things like that, I think, where you need to take the necessary steps to ensure that on every level we're making a statement that this kind of behavior is not acceptable and it will be attended to. If if you slip up, you've got to be, in this digital age, you've got to be extra vigilant and you've got to be extra capable of managing the tools that you have access to. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so Gerard, we're going to be back with new cases over the coming weeks. We would love to invite everyone to suggest what cases you would like us to cover, if there are particular stories. The other thing is not just focusing on cases, but psychological issues, psychological, aspects of psychology and forensic psychology that Gerard can speak to, or any of Gerard's network of friends can speak to that you would like us to cover. We'd love those suggestions. So do, consider this a fresh call to action. We are very much in the process of putting together our plans for the coming months. We're going to be bringing some great content over the Christmas period to keep you entertained while you're on holiday. You can drop us an email there at profilerafricainfo@gmail.com. If you would like to contribute to the show, you can drop us a super like on the channel. You can also become a member. And we did have a question we actually had a comment from, hi gents, from Mark.
Marlene.
Here we go. He said, hi gents, I really want to become a paid member, but I'm finding it difficult to make a payment. I'm an ex-SA, currently living in Vancouver, was a reserve sergeant in the SAP and SAPS. So one of your one of your fellow citizens there, Gerard. Just hit the join button. You need to obviously be logged into your Google account, and then you can hit the join button and become a member, or you can buy us a coffee, and there's the QR code. You can buy us a coffee as well. So those are ways that you can contribute. Do send us your ideas for future episodes.
Marlene's got a question that's, I think, very important there too.
Oh, what ultimately led him to being caught?
Yeah.
Were the victims, let's cover these two questions then to wrap up, Gerard. So were the victims given any counseling, first of all? And what ultimately led to him being caught?
Great questions, Marlene. So as I said, I wasn't involved on the policing side, but I can almost guarantee you that they would have been sent for counseling. Definitely the view is to give people counseling. There was this one silly viewpoint that some people hold that you shouldn't get the person to enter therapy until after the trial, which is absolute nonsense. And there's actually regulations by the NPA saying you'll get support for your witnesses. Therapy isn't about erasing people's memories. In fact, you'll have a better witness if you have a person who's been supported through psychotherapy. So I'm 99% sure they would have been given counseling. And what led to him being caught, if I recall correctly, one of the kids that he kind of lured, brought back to his place, and then he molested, said, I'm out of here, and went to the police station. And if I recall correctly, that's how he was ultimately caught, and then the whole thing kind of unfolded from there.
Okie dokie. Thank you. I think any advice for parents out there in particular, when it comes to kind of simple tactics to kind of stay vigilant and stay aware of what is happening in your children's lives?
Gerhard Ackerman was a stranger who lured these kids into his environment. But the majority of child molestation is taking place from people who are already in your environment. It's family, it's friends, it's the family friends, etc., their children. So, yes, stranger danger is important to warn our kids about that. But you have to just as equally talk about that no matter who it is, uncle, grandfather, family, your dad's best friend, you have to make it that your kids feel safe enough to come to you and that they will be listened to, because that's really reality where your children's bigger risk of being molested is coming from.
Yeah, I like those 3 simple steps: talk, listen, and believe. I think are 3 simple steps that you can apply when it comes to just engaging with your kids. Make sure that you talk to them. Make sure that you listen when they've got something to say, and if they say something which sounds uncomfortable or difficult to hear, then take the believe approach first. I think a good way to stay vigilant. So thank you, Gerard. A great discussion. Thank you to everyone who was joining the chat. It's lovely to spend another Tuesday evening with you back as usual. Gerard is going to be traveling the odd week in the near future. I know towards the end of the month you're going to be away for a week. But what we'll be doing is, if we're not doing the live, we'll be dropping pre-records here. And then if Gerard's not available at all, we're going to be bringing some new experts in as well, and filling in those gaps where Gerard is becoming a very, very busy a member of the Canadian law enforcement community. Thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to my mom for a super sticker. Thanks to Marius for joining us once again. Always lovely to have you with us, Marius. And
somebody asked if my dog is here, and yes, the answer is my dog arrived about 10 days ago. And just for your own interest, it's 3 times more expensive to get a dog into a country than it is to get a human being. So yeah, but my dog is somewhere.
Okay, good. Well done. There we go. So everyone knows. Thanks, Gerard. Lovely chatting to you as always. I will catch up with you in the week. We got plans to make and things to talk about. So we'll be doing that in the next few days. And we'll be back this time next week. I am Paul Llewellyn, as always, joined by Professor Gerhard Labuschagne. Stay safe. Stay aware, and remember, guys, trust nobody.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.